So we go together to Sicily because in 480 BC, the Greeks assembled at the Isthmus decided to dispatch embassies to seek assistance from those who had not yet joined the conflict against the Persians. These embassies were directed to Crete, Argos, and Sicily, regions that remained unaffected by Xerxes' extensive expedition, but held the potential for significant military and strategic contributions. The lack of involvement from these communities in the ongoing conflict could be interpreted in various ways. The Greek League presumed that geographical factors played a crucial role in hindering their alignment with the Hellenic cause. Being distant, Crete and Sicily, and still secure, Argos in the Peloponnese, these Greeks might not have fully comprehended the real and ideological threat posed by Xerxes' army on Hellenic territory. The embassies were thus tasked with portraying the situation in an effective and dramatic manner to secure support for the Hellenic cause. The ambassadors, therefore, had the task of representing the situation in an effective and dramatic manner so as to win them over the cause and, above all, secure military and political support appropriate to the time and needs of the alliance against the Persians. It becomes evident that the initial assumption of a simple and geographical logic for abstaining from the conflict was an erroneous calculation. The Cretan, Argive, and Sicilians respond to arguments and pressures with equal dialectical skill, analytically demonstrating the complex and deliberate reasons behind their decision to abstain from the conflict. Implicitly, they reveal to the ambassadors, to Herodotus, and to us that the unity of all Greeks against the barbarian Persians was an ideological slogan. The reality of the Hellenes was much more diverse and fragmented, and the call to the Hellenic cause was a banner cherished by the hegemonic cities most exposed danger, covering realities marked by internal conflicts. Moreover, Herodotus himself served as an important witness to the existence of the Medizers, I think it's Medizers, those Greeks who had sided with the Persians. These had already given earth and water to the great king, and when confronted with the massive Persian army traversing their territories, had no other choice. Yet the sanction against them persisted for a long time, with a geographical division marked by the pass of the Thermopylae. This split, even in subsequent events like the Third Sacred War, appears to delineate not only a concrete but also a symbolic and ideological border between the Greece of Eleutheria, the Greece of the polis, and the more fragile Central Greece, which had not yet undergone the process toward political maturity. And is the point of view of the Greek of the polis. Certainly, Herodotus provides implicit insights into the political reason that prompt the population of central northern Greece to align with the Persians. However, his judgment becomes notably harsher and more definitive when it comes to those who chose to remain neutral. This nuanced perspective reflects the complexities and moral judgments inherent in the historical events and the varied responses of different Greek city-states during this crucial period. Ed Eleutheros exestiei pein, ec tu mesu catemenoi emedizon. If may speak freely by staying neutral, the Medizit, I use the translation of Goodley from the Leib collection, available on the Perseus online on Perseus platform. Certainly, Gelon stands out among these figures. More so than in the other two cases, the Greek embassy to Syracuse becomes an extraordinary opportunity for the historian and his readers, and for us. The dialogue between Gelon and the ambassadors evolves into a genuine Western logos, providing insights into the political dynamics and the ideologies of the time. The historian explicitly concludes this logos with an expression that underlines unity and autonomy to the narrative, emphasizing the significance of this encounter in the broader context of Western history. Tamen apausikelies tosauta. Indeed, these chapters from Sicilian history in the these chapters from the seventh book serve as a crucial source for reconstructing various aspects of Sicilian history in the 5th century. They are indispensable for anyone engaged in Western history, shedding light on significant events such as the ascendancy of the denominates in eastern Sicily, Gelon's assumption of power in Syracuse, the narrative of Cadmus, and most notably the Battle of Mera. This battle is narrated in a concise manner, yet with sufficient details to understand both the complexity of the political dynamics leading of the conflict and, above all, the ideological significance attributed to it within Sicily and in a more general reinterpretation of the history. It is in fact portrayed as an epochal moment of conflict between the Greeks and all the barbarians, both to the east, the Persians, and to the west, the Carthaginians. The most striking aspect is precisely the parallelism between the two great battles at the beginning of the 5th century, destined to change the landscape of both Greece itself and Sicily. However, in this passage, it's important to highlight an element of strong discontinuity. In mainland Greece, the Hellenes emerge victorious, while in Sicily, only two individual men are mentioned, Gelon of Syracuse and Theron of Agragas, the tyrants. It's a substantial difference, clearly evident also in the indication of the recipients of the other embassies sent to the Argives and the Cretans, addressing peoples and cities rather than a single individual, as in the case of the island. Moreover, as Herodotus explicitly states, the ambassadors of the Greeks to Sicily had the sole objective of meeting Gelon, summexonte Geloni, recognizing his capacity and the right to make any significant decision not only concerning Syracuse, but it is important, the entire Sicily. It's precisely from this point that the narrative unfolds, explaining how Gelon came to power in Syracuse until the conclusion, to iutom entropo tyrannos egegone megas o Gelon. No, by this means Gelon had ground to greatness as a tyrant. This definition, tyrannos megas, explains why the Greeks decided to turn to him for help against the Persians. The form, context, and limits of that power constitute an evident point of interest for both the Greeks and the historian. This, I believe, explains the choice to depict the dialogue between the ambassadors and the Syracusans. If there are no compelling reasons to deny the historical authenticity of the embassy, I must note that I am among those who believe in Herodotus. The debate takes on a distinctly fictional character. This is not the appropriate context to delve into the truth of direct speeches in ancient histories. Thucydides has already provided definitive insights on this matter. It's more pertinent to highlight how the rhetorical dynamics within the protagonist's confrontation allow us to explore overreaching themes that transcend the specific context, delving into the political debate of the entire 5th century. Our focus today will center on two critical aspects. First, the representation and perception of Gelon's power, marking the onset of a series of Western tyrants, a recurrent challenge for observers of Greece. Second, we will examine the underlying principles and manifestation of hegemony in Greece, a pivotal topic for both general discourse and practical politics and military strategies in the Greece of the historian's contemporary era. The encounter between Gelon and the ambassadors is punctuated by 6 direct speeches, 3 for each side. Right from the opening remarks, the first of the two themes that concern us emerges: the definition of the power of the Syracuse of Gelon, which immediately comes for the forefront in the initial moments of the meeting. Let's take a closer look. Now, Syde dynamioste gar ekis megalos kai moratoi teselados su kelakiste meta arcontiges Sikelias, boethete tois eleutherusi tenellada kai sun eleutheu. The focal point is the expression arcontiges Sikelias, archon Sikelies, intriguing in both its components. While characterizing Gelon's autocratic authority, Herodotus designates him as a tyrannos, to iutom entropo tyrannos egenoe megas o Gelon. In parallel, a contrasting definition is employed, this time by the Athenian ambassador, who begins his speech, we will see later, addressing Gelon in this manner almost as an invocation, "O Basileu Syracusion." The interpretation of power definitions often poses a challenge for scholars. We acknowledge Herodotus' resistance to rigid classification, and the lexical analysis does not allow an ambiguous logic to be identified in the use of Basileus and Tyrannos. Additionally, a recent argument proposes that a decisive distinction between the two terms emerges in literary sources only towards the end of the 5th century. However, this doesn't imply a perfect interchangeability of the two terms. In Herodotus' text, rather than seeking a precise lexical definition, it's crucial to appreciate the context of use and the communicative intent attributed by the historian to his figures and characters. We lack official documentation on how Gelon's power was formally defined in Syracuse. However, we are well versed in how Herodotus chose to portray the authority of an autocratic ruler, describing him as someone who, you recognize the debate on the Constitution in the third book, nomaiate kinei patria, kai biata ignaikas kteinei te acritus. The dramatic setting in the Palace of Susa, deemed incredible by the Greeks, and the assignment of this negative depiction of the monarch to the Persian Otanes, unveil the intricate play of reflections orchestrated by the historian. The constitutional debate stands out not only for its theoretical exploration, but also for the diversity of perspectives compared. In the Persian War, the monarchos was the source of freedom, truth, and tradition. The ruler depicted by Otanes is the perfect tyrant in the Greek world. In reconstructing the speeches delivered in Syracuse, Herodotus refrains from using a term such as tyrannos, which, aside from being unofficial, had acquired a negative connotation in the eyes of him and his readers, potentially undermining the persuasive intent of the ambassador's mission. The term basileus, used by the Athenian, intended to confer legitimacy to Gelon. However, due to this recognizing the legitimacy, the Athenian is compelled to confine the scope of Gelon's power to Syracuse, or Basileo Syracusion, the only context where Gelon had legitimately acquired power and where he could possibly called as a king, Syracuse and not Sicily. The more innovative expression, therefore, is archon Sikelies, used by the ambassadors at the outset of their speech. Its immediate rhetorical logic lies in the fact that only a reference to the island, not to the city, can sustain the image of a not insignificant part of Greece, moirato tesellado su kelakiste, upon which the persuasive structure of the ambassadors is built. It is not merely a device confined to the introduction, but shapes the entire Syracusan discourse, revolving around the exercise of arche by both Gelon and we will observe later, his interlocutors in Greece. The Gelon portrayed by Herodotus is entirely in line with the definition attributed to him by other Greeks, creating a reciprocal resonance. Gelon doesn't merely accept the designation of Archon Sicilius. Instead, he strategically engages with it to his advantage when dismissing the ambassadors plays ironically on the exercise of arche. Xein Athenae ymei seoikete tus menar contasechein, tus de arxomenus exein. And finally, even recounting the moves of the tyrant following the refusal to collaborate with the Pan-Hellenic League, Herodotus once again invokes the exercise of arche, of the authority. E kai hen meno barbaros nika, ta de cremata autodidonai, kai gente kai udor tonarcheio gelon, hendeo Hellenes opiso e pagein, was to give him both of the money, art, and water on behalf of Gelon's dominions. It's not so easy to well translate this at all. Herodotus, once again adopting a first-person narrative, reaffirms Gelon's characterization as tyrannous. However, when describing the mandate entrusted by Gelon to Cadmus, he specifies that in the event of the Persians' victory, Cadmus should provide him with a sign of submission, ton archeio Gelon, referring to those lands, people, cities over whom he exercised his authority, arche. It seems to me that the true and most interesting ambiguity of Gelon's power lies not in the dissonance between Tyrannos and Basileus, but rather in the definition of the context and recipients of this power. Beyond diplomatic or institutional definition, Gelon possessed the power of a distinctly personal nature that exceeded the bounds of the Syracusan politeia and extended beyond the strictly civic sphere. The expression ton archeio Gelon intentionally retains ambiguity, indicating power not predetermined institutionally, but expandable based on the tyrant capabilities, authority, and strength. This coherence aligns with what Herodotus himself narrated about Gelon's rise to power. He had defeated the sons of Hippocrates and assumed power in Gela. Erche autos, aposteresas tus Hippocrateos paidas. Then he brought back the Gamoroi expelled by citizens. He conquered and destroyed Camarina and Megara through complex citizenship operations that also involved the Obian in Sicily. I'm uncertain about the fate that can be ascribed to this expression. The expression Herodotus attributes to the ambassadors. Moreover, I cannot determine whether on this matter he spoke on behalf of a more commonly used way of referring to or defining the tyrants of Syracuse. Nevertheless, it's noteworthy that in the historical and historiographical tradition, Herodotus' passage is not an isolated incident, but rather marks the beginning of a small series. Allow me to offer a brief reflection on this. Let's progress in time, reach another Syracusan tyrant, Dionysius the Elder. When discussing Dionysius, the historiographical tradition often brings up Gelon as well, attributing to him the desire to emulate him. Dionysius would have been inspired by him even in assuming the title of Strategos Autokraton. What we find intriguing in this context is not historiographical tradition, but three epigraphic documents. We have three decrees issued by Athens at different intervals. Firstly, Dionysius is honored along with his brothers. Subsequently recognized as agathos, he becomes a partner in the establishment of an alliance. Lastly, Dionysius and his sons are granted Athenian citizenship. Throughout this corpus, Dionysius is consistently referred to as Sicilias Archon, a designation without parallels in any other epigraphic Western document. Despite its opacity, this title must have been considered satisfactory by both parties, Athens and the tyrant. When composing an honorary decree, the Athenian officials, ever watchful, would have taken great care in selecting a formally correct title that would not give rise to suspicion or disappointment on the part of the tyrant, whose favor they sought to secure. As demonstrated by the speech delivered by Lysias in Olympia, in Athens there were many voices unfavorable to the tyrant. The decision to establish diplomatic relations with Dionysius required not only attention and first-hand information, but also the identification of an approach agreeable to him. The expression Osychelias Archon, in fact, signified an undeniable recognition of the purely personal nature of his power, involving brothers and sons, and transcending a strictly civic dimension. In reality, as in the case of Gelon, the extension of influence over the entire Sicily was forced, as no Syracusan strategos ever managed to control the entire island. What Athens emphasized and Dionysius willingly accepted was the exercise of hegemony. The contours of this hegemony never took on a formalization similar to that of a Symmachie or a koinon. Nevertheless, in practice, it expressed the ability for the great Syracusan strategoi to influence and determine the choices of a significant portion of the island's inhabitants. This was indeed arche, the exercise of power. After after Gelon, after Dionysius, there is one last account from the life of Demetrius by Plutarch. It was the year 302 BC, and Demetrius, the son of Antigonus, was rising to power. After conquering the Peloponnese and during the Isthmian Games, he called for an assembly at the Isthmus where he proposed the formation of a league. This league led to Demetrius being proclaimed the leader of Greece, Egemontes Elados. Demetrius believed that both he and his father had a sort of hereditary right to the title of king, which they had assumed after the victory over Ptolemy at Salamis in Cyprus. This triumph triggered a chain of events that involved all the other Diadochoi, the successors of Alexander the Great, who subsequently adopted the same royal title. This tradition is well attested, but Diodorus Siculus' version includes an interesting addition. Indeed, when Agathocles learned that the aforementioned dynasty had adopted the diadem, νομίζον μέτε δυνάμεση, μέτε κόρα, μέτε το εισπραχθέζει, λέει πεσtai τούτο, e auton anegores Basilea. This indirectly explains why Agathocles was included among those targeted by Demetrius with ironic toasts. We see prosagoreuontas edeo sequeton parapoton lambanonton Demetriu Basileus, Seleuco Elefantarcu, Ptolemaio Namarco, Lusimaco Gazophilakos, Agathocleus Tezucheliotu, Nesiarcu. So, historically, we know that Demetrius and Agathocles had significant interactions, particularly after Agathocles' conquest of Corcyra, and Alade became a dowry for his daughter and a focal point for political strategies involving Pyrrhus and Demetrius. However, the crucial aspect here is the epithet chosen by Demetrius Colachus for Agathocles, Nesiarchos. Agathocles believed himself entitled to the title of Basileus due to his military exploit, including the African campaign. In contrast, Demetrius convinced him to the limits of the island, employing a cleverly chosen epithet. It had institutional credibility due to the institutionalization, of the League of the Nesiotic Islands, where the Nesiarchos held an official role as the commander of the islands. But in reality, Demetrius was playing with words, as the reference went not to the island of the Aegean, but to a single island, Sicily. Definition pronounced with denigratory intent rather than an older heritage, and once again expressed a difficulty in defining the power exercised by the Greeks in Syracuse. Even at the end of the 4th century, it was evidently a clearly territorial power, which had the island as its natural extension, to the detriment of both the well-consolidated Punic eparchy, and the other Greek polis. Archon Sicelies, or Sicelies Archon, Nesiarchos, are definitions emphasizing the most distinctive element of the power of the tyrants of Syracuse. It was exercised over a territory, potentially over the entire island, and the vocation of the island responded to a necessary political and diplomatic forcing. It is with this Gelon, the ruler of the island, that the Greek ambassadors find themselves discussing. His special position explains the importance of the other theme at the center of our current reading, the legitimacy of hegemonic rule. It's clear that this is the contested issue, the one on which the two parties do not find agreement, ultimately leading to the ambiguous neutrality of Syracuse. There is nothing new on this point. However, what I want to emphasize today is the gradual shift from the specific contextualization in the Persian War to a broader dimension that encompasses the entire 5th century. We can read again the initial moments of the meeting when the envoys present the reasons that brought them to Syracuse. Epepsan Emeas Lacedaemonioite, kai Athenaioi, kai Otuton Symmachoi, Paralampsomenus proston Barbaron. So I choose the text chosen by Pietro Vannicelli and Aldo Corcella with the te kai Athenaioi. When enumerating the entities whose voice they claim to represent, the messengers don't mention generic Greeks first, but rather Lacedaemonioite, kai Athenaioi, kai Otuton Symmachoi. This is not a random sequence. Not only, as noted by Pietro, is the most detailed definition of the Hellenic League offered by Herodotus, but it accurately and certainly intentionally reflects the power dynamics within it. The order among the entities precisely mirrors what we read in the Serpentine column, the offering made by the Greek coalition at Delphi with a tithe from the spoils of Plataea. This monument, well known throughout Greece, was certainly seen by Herodotus at Delphi, as he provides a brief but accurate description of it in Book 9. The golden tripod was placed on the three-headed bronze serpent near the altar, and the description begins with a brief heading followed by a list of cities arranged in groups of 3 for each of the 3 spirals of the serpent. Regardless of the order governing the list, it's evident that the first trio represents, in descending hierarchical order, the 3 leading city-states of the Greek world: Toideton, Polemon, and Polemeon, Lacedaemonioi, Athenaioi, Corinthioi. In summary, we could say that the history of the central decades of the 5th century is the story of Athens' effort to move from the second to the first of this position, an effort that leaves some evident traces even in development of our Syracusan dialogue. The logic conveyed by the envoys is evidently Greek. They reference the crossing of the Hellespont, Xerxes' descent, and his primary target for punishment, Athens. In outlining the situation, they repeatedly evoke the notion of Hellas, kai epagon pantatoneon straton ectes asies stratelatesein epiten Ellada, no de echon pasant en Ellada hypoeotu poiesastai. Their reasoning is clear. The Persian intends to subjugate all of Greece, and since Gelon holds power over Sicily, he controls a not insignificant part of the entire Greek world. Sudedynamios tegarekis megalos kai morato ites Ellados superakiste, boethede tois eleutherusi tenellada kai suneletheo. The invitation is to a united and cohesive Greece capable of collaborating for the freedom of all, with a final warning about the folly of any illusion that Gelon might hope to escape Xerxes' ambitions in case the Greeks prove unsuccessful and subjected. And they may onomen cataprodidosi, yes, o de methelosi timorein, to de eugiainon tessellados e oligon, tuto dede dei nonghi in etaime pese pasa he Hellas. The envoys attempt to bridge the gap between themselves and Gelon with a final threat. And if the Persian wins, don't hope it won't come against you. However, Gelon establishes it by reacting vehemently. Men of Hellas, Andres Hellenes, logon econtes pleonecten et olmesate me symmacon epiton barbaron paracaleontes elthein. Gelon's opening is very clear in this regard. Addressing the Angeloi with the expression Andres Hellenes, he establishes and emphasizes a difference between the Hellenes beyond the sea and those in Sicily, the Siciliotai, to whom he gives a voice. He dedicates a few lines to the island's previous history, with reference to events that are at the center of a hard discussion, its crucial text in our knowledge of its century. I think of the reference to a conflict with the Carthaginians, Proscarchedonius Neikos, the revenge for the death of Spartan Dorieus, I see, yes, you have here, yes, Don Dorieus to Anaxandrideo prosegestaion phonon, and the liberation of the Emporia from which all would have derived great advantage. The Emporia suneletheroun upon hymin megalae Opheliae Tecai e Pauresies Gegonasi. On each of these points, and particularly on the correct identification of these Emporia, criticism has been very engaged. However, here I am mainly interested in emphasizing the strongly rhetorical nature of Gelon's reply, especially in two aspects. Gelon, first of all, constructs his speech through opposition rather than proximity, creating a clear line between the Greeks who arrived in Syracuse, the Andres Hellenes, Eumeis, and himself, Hemoi, Hemin. Alla heugar emin kai petoamenon cateste, nunde, e peide perieleleutheo polemos kai apicteis Eumeas, uto de Gelonos mnestis gegone. As noted by Pietro Vannicelli, this closure seals this first part with a rare and poetic expression. The unity of Greece invoked by the envoys in the name of freedom, secondly, is not restored, but duplicated in the duplication of the barbarian. Et olmesate me symmacon epiton barbarum paracaleontes elthei, e autoi de meo proteron defentus barbaricus stratu sune papsastai. Therefore, the theory of a united Greece and a danger that could have spread from Greece itself to the west is dismantled from within, because the West already had its own barbarian, had been left alone. Tute Cathineas tade apanta hypo barbaroisi nemetai. If it were up to you, this region would be in the hands of our barbarians. Gelon's speech displays undeniable rhetorical skill as he interprets the freedom slogan in his own way, emphasizing the liberation of Emporia and subtly hinting at a comparison between the battles of Salamis and Himera, as later reported by Herodotus. While the reconstruction is fictional, Gelon's skill mirrors that of Herodotus. The emphasis on duplicated fronts and the Western threat from the Carthaginians is likely not an invention of the historian, but stems from Sicilian tradition, possibly linked to denominated propaganda. Additionally, there are elements related to independent traditions about Spartan Dorieus, the fugitive son of Anaxandridas. Information about him likely converged from Greece, especially Sparta and Sicily, making him a crucial connecting element between the two parts of the Mediterranean in Herodotus' histories. With the expression "Uto de Gelonos mnestis gegone," it seems like the matter is closed, the speech concluded, and the scores settled. There are Greeks on one side and Greeks on the other side, each as their own barbarian, each their own freedom to defend. A united Greece does not exist. However, Gelon continues to bring up the core topic of the discussion, hegemony. This theme shifts the tone of the conversation. In the first part, both in the initial request and the early portion of the tyrant's response, there is an unmistakable historical portrayal of discussion with numerous references to specific events, such as Xerxes crossing the Hellespont, or the war against Carthage, or the death of Dorieus. In the second part, the conversation gradually adopts more general tones, moving beyond the specific context and evolving into a reflection that extends far beyond the Persian War until the latter half of the 5th century, until Herodotus' own time. Gelon requests command over the entire league, basing his claim on the forces he can provide. Parechomenos, diekosias, tetriereas, kai dismurios oplitas. Epidelogo toiode tade episcomai, eposte strategoste kai hegemonto lenlenon hesomai, proston barbaron. Gelon's offer includes triremes, hoplites, cavalry, archers, along with a commitment to provide citos for all. This demonstrates that his request to be recognized as the strategoste kai hegemonto nelleno is grounded in reason and logic. He epidelogo toiode. In detailing his forces, Gelon highlights something that only Sicily and no other region could guarantee to the coalition: citos. This emphasis appears consistent with the early reference to the advantages and profits of Emporia, indicating a well-established image in Greece of Sicily as a region rich in resources and opportunities, both agriculturally and commercially, making it a necessary partner. On the other hand, the catalogue of military forces presents a debated but informative picture of the actual power of Syracuse under the Dinomenes. Specifically, the arrangements of elements begin with triremes and then proceeds to hoplites, navy, fleet, and then the hoplites. This order may not be neutral and suggests a strategic approach of gradual presentation, highlighting naval power before the hoplitary. When Gelon asked to be recognized as both strategos and hegemonton Hellenon, is seeking recognition that goes beyond the purely military implication and carries significant political weight. Hegemon is indeed a weighty term with a historical context that includes figures like Agamemnon in the past and Philippus in the future. This term always denotes a leadership that extends beyond strictly strategic or military operations, encompassing a broader capacity for command, that involves all operation, including political and diplomatic aspects necessary during a conflict. The response of the Lacedaemonian Syracuse, the only one mentioned in the Panhellenic delegation, makes explicit what Gelon had suggested and clarifies that there can be no hegemony outside the Peloponnese. When Syracuse heard that, he could not contain himself and he cried, Aleimen bulea boethein teladi istiarxomenos upo, lacedaemonion, eidara medicaios archestai suit mede boethe. The mention of Agamemnon is intended to realign the discussion, at least from the perspective of a Greek loyal to the most significant and legitimizing tradition. It explicitly brings together the key terms of the debate, hegemony and arche, the poles within which the notion of providing aid to Greece is articulated. These represent the focal points in the internal Greek discourse among cities during Herodotus' era. This isn't the first instance where Herodotus portrays such discussion, often attributing to the Spartans a straightforward and categorical discourse. They invoke tradition and justice to give substance to a reality that, at least in their eyes, seems self-evident and necessary. They represent their leadership as obvious. There are no nuance, no mediation, no elaborate arguments. The response from Gelon takes a significantly different tone as he turns the proposal of the Lacedaemonioi to his advantage. With great skill, he first reaffirms his own primacy and then proceeds to make a counter-proposal. Alepete iuminologos suto prosantes catistatai, hemesti iupexomen tu arcaiu logo. Hei tu men pezu mei segeusti tu de nauticone go. Ed emine done tu catathalas anegemonewein tu pezu egothelo. It seems to me that the heart of the second part of the discussion between Gelon and the Greeks is all here, in a response that, unlike the initial proposal, possesses greater realism. Finally, it's not put forward to provoke or test the strengths of the interlocutor, but rather to seriously assess the true margins of the negotiation and the resilience of the opposing front. At this point, the discourse transitions from the realm of rhetorical image to the context of an actual diplomatic negotiation. At this stage, every detail becomes of utmost interest. I would like to highlight three aspects, all converging with each other. Firstly, the debate shifts its focus from generic Greeks to only the Lacedaemonians represented by Syracuse, acknowledged as the true interlocutors of Gelon, as the discussion revolves around the leadership. Just as they had invoked their Agamemnon, the leader of all, in the first great Panhellenic enterprise, Gelon turns to them. Secondly, while reiterating his formidable strength in land forces, Gelon simplifies the catalogue of military forces to a straightforward dichotomy, infantry and navy, theoretically admitting the possibility of choosing the command of only one of the two parts. By evoking these two components, implicitly acknowledges the two facets not only of the Panhellenic army, but also of the hegemony exercised within it, infantry and fleet, land and sea, simply put, Sparta and Athens. The two eyes of Greece, the two great powers to which Greece was yoked in a binary vision that ancient historiographers seem to present as inevitable, despite scattering text, as in this case, with signs of a much more complex articulated internal structure. In this binary structure, no major power could be added, only a replacement could be contemplated. In 480, there was no reason to think that indispensable part of the Panhellenic army could be Athenian, represented by its fleet. The destinies of armies and cities still seem to depend primarily on the outcome of applied battles. From this perspective, Sparta had no rivals due to the superior organization and arete of the Aeropletae, recently celebrated at Thermopylae with the sacrifice of Leonidas. Finally, the possibility opened up by Themistocles' choice, which had invested the Athenians in the fleet and sea, were yet to unfold. At the time of the delegation dispatch, the emphasis on the navy was still a sort of gamble that would receive its first resounding confirmation at Salamis. It was close, very close, but the moment had not yet arrived. In other words, Gelon's proposal, although seemingly equal or indifferent to condition, actually translated into a request for command of the fleet. In this domain, he believed he would encounter less opposition from the Spartans. And indeed, it's not the Spartan man who responds to him, but the envoy of the Athenians, who unintentionally anticipates the response of the Lacedaemonians and begins the final exchange with Gelon. Ho Basileus Syracosion, uc hegemonos Deomene Hellas apepem se Emeas pro se alla straties. Hellas sent us to you to ask not for a leader, but for an army. The argument is grounded in realism, as the Greeks had originally sought military assistance, not intending to negotiate command. However, it ultimately reveals the true nature of the direction the discussion had taken. It was no longer focused on discussing military contingents and contribution, but had shifted towards the question of command. Most importantly, the Athenians' primary interlocutor was no longer just Gelon, but also the Spartans. With this shift, if the central exchange between Syracuse and Gelon existed in a transitional space between the time of the embassy and the time of Herodotus, the Athenians' words now carry the perspective of the full 5th century. The Panhellenic front, and particularly the alliance between Sparta and Athens, exposed a significant crack. The Athenians feared that Sparta might prioritize Gelon over them and concede command of the fleet. Faced with this concern, they can no longer rely on the Spartans and remain silent. Instead, they have no option but to voice their concern directly. Emetere garesti aute, caime auton bulomenon lacedaemonion. Tuto isimenon egestai bulomenoi uc antiteinomen, allo de paresumen udeni nauarchei. Emetere garesti aute. Another crucial point emerges, where the opposition between us and you is no longer between Greeks and barbarians, not even between mainland Greeks and Siceliotae, but rather between Spartans and Athenians. This is an opposition that makes no sense in 480, but resonates in the tones, concepts, and words of the image that the Athenians themselves constructed after, not during, the Persian Wars. It's an image of splendid solitude, exceptionalism, and unable preeminence. Only by shifting the focus to the time of an empire at its zenith can we comprehend the closing remarks of the Athenian speaker. Mategar ode pararon Hellenos straton, pleiston emen ectemenoi, esire cosios eontes Athenaios incoresomen tes hegemonies, archaiotaton menephons parechomenoi, muno ideontes umetanastai Hellenon. The conclusion, particularly in its central part, deviates significantly from diplomatic discourse and aligns more with a rhetorical eulogy, a style commonly associated with Athenian production, especially during the 5th and 4th centuries. As noted by Pietro, While the reference to Menesteo serves a necessary response to the Spartan mention of Agamemnon, the difference in stature between the two figures is only partially eased by an equally legitimizing reference to Homer. More compelling and impactful are the other aspects that assert Athens on the world stage. According to the Athenian speaker, Athens holds preeminence because it commands the largest fleet, boasts the oldest people, Archaeotaton Menethnos, and stands as the only city that has not migrated, establishing itself as autochthonous. Power at sea, antiquity, autochthony, a formidable triad that pervades all of Athenian rhetoric, isolating it definitely within the Panhellenic context. I want to highlight the use of monoi alone, particularly incongruous and almost counterproductive in its context, especially after the envoys had sought unity across all for Greece to gain Gelon's favor. This monoi, the same term, resonates elsewhere in Herodotus' histories, notably in the famous encounter with the Aegeans in the ninth book. Oitines monoi elenon de monomachezantes to Perse. While the reference is to Marathon, it extends to all for Greekness, translating solitude into preeminence. At Marathon, in the conclusion of his speech to Callimachus, Miltiades says, Esti toi patris Teleutere, kai polis prote tonente Elladi. It's not a prophecy of the Athenian Empire. These are reflections of the empire cast upon the narrative of war. The final reply of Gelon is perhaps the most famous part of this dialogue. Xene Athenaies, Eumeise oikatetus men archontas eichen to the arxomenos ukexein. And then Angelon teste ladi otiek tu eniautu toera aute ex araitari. Tell your Hellas that her ear had lost its spring. Gelon, or rather Herodotus, presents an argument that he also rhetorically refined, Eumeise oikatetus mena archontas eichen tus de arxomenus ukexein, explicitly placing the theme of arche at the center, understood as power. Power exists as long as there is someone upon whom it can be exercised. It's an exaggerated and paradoxical statement that highlights how the stakes were precisely the supremacy among great powers. The real problem did not concern the arxomenoi, abundant, but rather the archontes, decidedly too many in an overly crowded field. In the international arena, in other words, there can be no balance between arcane and archestine, which is the heart of democracy. In my opinion, the centrality for this issue in the political reflection in the 5th century makes not necessary to place the second part of the debate, and in particular the reflection on hegemony and arche, at a specific moment in 5th century, especially in the years leading to the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War. Tensions regarding who commands whom run through the entire century, and certainly have their roots in the dialect between the powerful in the Persian War, the first occasion where the major cities of Greece have the opportunity to measure military forces, political skills, and diplomatic foresights against each other. The comparison and tensions were already present during the Persian Wars. I do not think it can be said that Herodotus retroactively attributes attitudes or themes that belong instead to the ears of the Pentecontetia. I believe instead that he, reflecting his contemporary time, makes explicit elements of discussion and politically alive knots that were implicitly already well present at the beginning of the 5th century. His figures, including Gelon, give substance and voice to what will finally become evident in subsequent dynamics. That discordance between the present and recent past never ceases, explains also why Herodotus believes he should dwell on the last very famous line of the speech he himself attributes to Gelon. To grasp the meaning, modern commentators point to a passage in Aristotle's rhetoric that attributes the same imagery to a funeral speech by Pericles, possibly for the fall in the Samian War around 440. This suggests an adaptation by Herodotus of a theme prevalent in the political speeches of the latter half of the 5th century to the Gelonian context. However, the Thucydidean Epitaphios takes a different tone, not mourning, but rather glorifying the contribution of young bodies to the homeland, promising them everlasting glory. It even encourages parents to procreate more, to offer additional youth to Athens. In any case, the reference to Pericles, in my view, reinforces the idea that this imagery originates from Greece itself, particularly in Athens. To put it differently, it seems unlikely that the historical Gelon truly employed this image. It has been rightly noted that this adaptation might not be entirely pertinent unless Gelon, the Gelon of Herodotus, aims to depict all for Western Greece as the youth of Greece. This um, is a suggestion by Howard Wells, contrasting with the ancient and, in a sense, old continental realities. It's an intelligent proposal that merits further consideration, prompting us to reevaluate how the West, particularly Sicily, is portrayed in Greece itself, especially in Athens. Discussing power and the evolution of Archaea in the second half of the 5th century, Sicily was undoubtedly a crucial perspective. Throughout the 5th century, it had become increasingly complex, a puzzle not entirely decipherable in terms of internal organization, autonomy for individual polis, role of Syracuse, and of indigenous ethne. Perhaps after the fall of the Nomadids, it was no longer entirely clear what strength Sicily possessed and the extent of Syracuse's control over the entire island. Recall, for instance, the well-known way in which Alcibiades describes Sicily, Caetone Sikelian, plumme metagignoskete, aus epimegalen dynamin esomenon, o cloistegaris dumectoi, poliandrusia e polis, cae radia secus itum politontas metabolas, cae epidocas. My image could align with Herodotus' supplemental explanation, addressing an audience that might no longer have a clear understanding when discussing the West. In short, it was no longer apparent which part of the Greek world was superior, especially questioning whether Sicily truly represented the spring of Greek civilization in any sense of the expression. I don't have a definitive answer, and indeed I plan to reflect further on this aspect. And I'm grateful to the Herodotus Helpline for providing me with the opportunity to delve into this theme. Thank you so much.